Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night, whatever time of day it is. Welcome to this week's episode of Delving with Devin. So we're going to be sticking with Frontier, just because Frontier is such an awesome format. It's so new, it's so fresh. There's lots of deck lists. Nobody knows what's good, what's bad, what's ugly. So we're going to be sticking with it. And this week we've got a list of standards passed. We've got CFB's Pro Tour M15 list with some upgrades, of course, for Frontier. So let's just go through the list so we know what's happening here. Basically, the game plan is to get cheap artifacts into play and then turn them into big creatures and sacrifice them to deal a lot of damage. So this is kind of like an aggro burn deck. That's how it plays out a lot of the time. So how are we doing that? We've got our pump effects over here. So Ensoul Artifact is pretty much the name of the game. Put it onto any artifact, becomes a 5/5 creature in addition to its other types. So that'll be good with our cheap artifacts. We'll get to those in a few moments. We've got 4 Ghost Fire Blades, basically cranial plating in Frontier. So 1 mana +2/+2, costs 3 to equip or only 1 to equip if it's an artifact. So given that we're running so many artifacts, it's basically 1 mana equip +2/+2, which is pretty sweet. We've got our burn spells. So running a 1 of Wild Slash. It's basically shock with upside. We've got the 4 lightning strikes. Seems to be a format staple in these red decks. We're running between 3 to 4 of them in a lot of these decks. So we're doing 4 today. And now we've got Shrapnel Blast. So it's basically a lightning strike that deals 5 damage, but you have to sack an artifact. So this deck has got a crazy amount of reach between, connecting once with a creature that has an Ensoul Artifact on it, and then you can Shrapnel Blast them. That's 10 damage out of nowhere. So you got a lot of reach for this deck, which I do like. Going over here to the creature base. Today I'm running 2 Pia and Kran Nilar. So this very powerful card. You used to see a lot of play in Modern. But basically it's 3 bodies, 2 of which are artifacts that have flying, which can be relevant. And then of course you can sack artifacts to deal damage. We've got 3 Thopter Engineers. So again, this makes multiple bodies. Flyer. It gives our artifacts haste, which could be good. If you like top deck a copter, you can attack the turn it comes into play, those sorts of things, which is pretty sweet. Also, these cards are really good against Fatal Push, and I do think Fatal Push, it's on Moto, so we could be up against it today. And anytime you can diversify your threats, make your threats multiple bodies, it's really good against spot removal. So we got, of course, 4 Smuggler's Copters. You guys saw last week when we were playing the Jeskai Flies deck how powerful Smuggler's Copter is. And I think it's going to be just as powerful, if not even more powerful today, given the artifact synergies we got going on here. We've got an old All-Star. We got Hangerback Walker. Great card. Goes great with Shrapnel Blast. Also goes great with Ensoul Artifact. Those sorts of things. We've got 4 Ornithopters. So this card sees play in Modern Affinity. And typically it sees play when its body is relevant or its mana cost is relevant, and I think all those things are true in this deck. It's cheap to come down, so it can be equipped with either Ghostfire Blade or the Ensoul Artifact. We have Shrapnel Blast to sack it. We got Kren to sack it to deal damage. We've also got our other 1-drop here, Inventor's Apprentice. So this is basically Kirdape. Kirdape was actually, I was looking into some history of Magic. Kirdape was actually banned in Extended in 1997, along with cards like Soul Ring, Demonic Tutor. It was just too good of a card for Extended to go along with those other cards, so they had to ban it at the time. Of course, power creep is set in a little bit, so it's not quite the intimidating force it once was. But I think in this deck, this is basically a Kirdape, and that's pretty good. So going over here to the mana base, we got the 4 Darksteel Citadels. So this is great to go like turn 1 Citadel, turn 2 Island or Blue Source, and Soul Artifact it. Or play a Copter, turn 3 is play Ensoul Artifact on it, so you can attack with it that very same turn. It's indestructible, which is great, especially I'll get to some of the weaknesses of the deck pretty soon, but this card kind of goes against those weaknesses, if that makes sense. So at the end of the deck tech, I'll kind of talk a little bit about I think what the weaknesses are of this deck. We got 15 red sources and we got 12 blue sources. We've got 2 Wandering Firmorals. But this is basically a mono red deck, splashing blue for the 4 Ensoul Artifacts. So basically 12 blue sources, that's a reasonable number for just 4 cards. But yeah, deck is very hyper aggressive, very explosive, it's got a lot of reach, should be a lot of fun. Let's just quickly talk about the sideboard here. So given that we're running an artifact deck, we We got 3 Tormod's Crypts, great against graveyards, but also in those matchups, if you don't need to use it as a graveyard hate card, you can always like Ensoul Artifact it, get in for 5, and then if you do need to sack it to blow them out or whatever, you can always sack it later on. We've got 2 Roasts, just a catch-all removal spell, 2 Smashes, again, in a Copter metagame, Smash to Smithereens is pretty strong. We got a Seismic Rupture, deals 2 damage each creature without flying, so a lot of our creatures that we care about fly, or our Apprentice should have 3 toughness, so it shouldn't really affect us, and against these like tokens decks, it should be the Goblins decks, and that sort of thing should be a pretty strong card. We've got 1 Negate, again just a catch-all. We've got a Thopter Spy Network, which is great against attrition-y decks. Just being able to make a Thopter every turn, draw cards every turn, it just seems pretty good against decks. And being an enchantment, it can be hard for them to deal with sometimes. We've got 2 Disdainful Strokes, great against the big bombs of the format, Dig Through Time, Gear Hulks, those sorts of cards, Gideon. And then we've got 3 Dispels, and I think the Dispels are good just because it shores up some of the weaknesses that this deck has. So those weaknesses are a couple cards that didn't exist when this deck saw Standard play. Those cards are Crackling Doom, because at the time, if you just go like Ensoul Artifact on Darksteel Citadel, they just couldn't do anything about it. They just had no answer, nothing was in the format to deal with it. But now that Crackling Doom is a thing, that's not quite the KO that it used to be. So we have some Dispels to bring in against Crackling Doom decks. Another card is Fatal Push. So what you could use to be able to do is Ensoul Artifact onto an Ornithopter, and unless if they had a immediate answer, like a shock effect right then, that would probably just be GG, because they can't really deal with a 5/5 flyer. But Fatal Push, along with Crackling Doom, kind of is a good out for that line of play. So just having access to 3 Dispels seems pretty good. Also, Dig Through Time. Dig Through Time is probably one of the strongest cards in the format. So just having a very cheap, like if someone has to tap, I don't know, 4 mana, 5 mana, whatever they tap for the Dig Through Time, even 2 mana, and then just being able to 1 mana dispel it, there's no feeling better in the world than dispelling a Dig Through Time. With the exception of resolving your Dig Through Time, that probably feels even better. But there you guys have the list. I think it's going to be pretty fun to run. It's very explosives. Sometimes you're going to have to determine, do I go all in? Do I kind of play around things? And that in an aggressive deck is always, it's a fun, interesting challenge. Oh, one card that I failed to mention was this Tomb of the Spirit Dragon. Not that it plays a huge role, but it's basically colorless mana. You can tap it in 2 to gain a life for each creature you control. So against these other aggressive decks, you can just, gain 3-4 life a turn or whatever. And I think the mana base can afford it, being basically like 1 color splashing blue. So yeah, there you guys have the list. Hopefully you guys enjoy Frontier, and we'll see you guys in the first round.